Hello, everyone. Sorry about the delay. Technical difficulties, as we all are aware, happen sometimes. So, welcome everyone to Stress Free IEP, the show where we help families build their village to raise their neurodivergent children with confidence and support. I'm your host, Frances Schefter, special education attorney, advocate, and fellow parent, walking this journey with you. Each week, we shine a light on the professionals, resources, and real world strategies that can empower you to navigate the IEP process and beyond. Whether you're tuning in live on Facebook or YouTube or listening later on your favorite podcast app, we're so glad you're here. Please feel free to ask any questions live or in the comment section later, and we promise to respond. Let's dive in and meet today's amazing guests. Today, we are joined by two nationally respected leaders in special education advocacy. Hayley Jacobson is an educational consultant and ADHD coach who helps families secure the right services and school placements for students with learning differences. We are also joined by Rich Weinfeld, a longtime special education expert, author, and founder of Weinfeld Education Group. With decades of experience advocating for students with complex and twice exceptional needs. Haley and Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us,
Thank you.
Francis.
Yeah. Of course. And so both of you have so much experience. But I think the main reason that we were talking about having you on the show is to talk about all the different options of school, because that has been a really hot topic lately. At least I've seen is the public school right? Is it not right? Which program in the public school? So do you want to start off, Rich, with like a little bit of a highlight of what's available out there?
Yeah,
Or
I'd be glad to. There, we live in an area, the Maryland, DC, Maryland, Virginia area that is so rich in choices. It's just a wealth of different alternatives, and actually, that can make it really hard for parents and students to figure out what is the best fit. There are public school options, and in our area, that includes not just general education with or without special ed, but it also includes magnet programs, lottery programs, some that are competitive to enter, some that are pure lottery to enter. Um, then we have special ed schools that serve students whose needs cannot be met in their home school or homeschool district. And of course, there's a whole process for being found eligible for those schools, which I'd be glad to speak about later. And then there are a variety of different kinds of private schools that range from more traditional private schools to private schools that don't necessarily publicize that they're for students who are neurodivergent or learn differently, but do a good job with those students. And then there are those private schools that embrace that mission. So it's a wide variety of choices, and I think having some level of professional help with that is can be very important.
yeah, definitely. So I know that's something that you guys help with, but like for parents that might be listening, like I'm sure overwhelmed, like, okay, great. Yeah, we know there's everything out there. Like, how do they start? Like if we have a family that they just got eligible for an IEP, let's say, and they're in the public school system, but it's just not working. Like, how do they start looking to explore what's out there?
Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about it, and then I want to get Haley to chime in as well. So, I think the most important thing to when you talk about starting this journey is to have a really good understanding of who the student is, what are their current strengths and needs, and that involves many different things. But one very important thing is to have a really strong current assessment that really delves into not only the challenges, but where are the strengths, because we're going to ultimately want to match a school program with the strengths as well. We also establish who the child is from teacher reports, narrative teacher reports, conversations with teachers, report cards, testing that the school routinely does. And certainly we establish it from what the parents see. The parents are the number one expert on the child. So what are they seeing about the child at home? Where do they flourish? Where do they struggle? So that's the place to start. And Hayley, I don't know if you want to piggyback on that a little bit in terms of the private schools.
Sure, sure. So I think one of the things that's really important to keep in mind, it goes back to what you were saying, Rich, about understanding strengths and needs, is really having a clear-eyed vision. Really know your child. Have a better sense of what they can't, how they can function in different environments. Sometimes parents, as a parent myself, we of course always want to see the best in our child, but being able to really have a good understanding of who your child is and what they need, and why the current placement isn't the right placement. Really understanding that, so that can help drive what those next options might be.
Yeah. And when talking about evaluations, I know it's been, for me at least, current evaluations, they say within 2 years. So like if parents are like, oh, well, it's been 2 years, you're okay, as long as it's been within 2 years. Have you guys seen something different with that at any of the schools?
I'm, I think the one thing is what's legally required. If a student has an IEP, then we have to consider whether or not we need a new evaluation at least every 3 years. But if there's a problem right now, and the child is not being able to access their education, it may be time for a new assessment, and that new assessment might look at things that the previous assessment didn't look at. So it really, assessments are driven by questions. What are our current questions, and do we have answers for them? And if we don't, we might want to go back and get a new assessment.
Yeah,
I think
definitely. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that sometimes, I've heard 2 years, 3 years, but I think what's really important, other than answering these other questions, is really knowing what are their current levels, where are they functioning at this point, because it might look really different than 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and being able to give these schools as much information as possible is very important, because sometimes they will look at an existing report that was done 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and the child has grown and things look different. So I think, in addition to having the updated assessment, or in conjunction with that, is to just make sure it truly reflects who the child is now.
Right. And that's another thing I say, like, so legally every 3 years we have to look at eligibility and determine whether assessments are needed to determine eligibility. But parents can ask for it as long as it hasn't been done in 12 months. One of the things I always say is, like, at minimal, you should be doing academic every year, I think.
Right.
Because it's just, there's too many changes. And then when it comes to other things, I always say 5th grade, because you're transitioning to middle school, and 8th grade because of the transition to high school, and of course pre-K because of the transition to kindergarten. Like, those years you need full assessments, because there's just so much happens in that difference, and you're getting ready for a totally new setting. Because unfortunately, I know at least in Montgomery County Public Schools, most of the ones around here, the settings don't stay the same when you go from elementary to middle to high school, right?
No.
Right.
And
Right.
you know what? And honestly, I think that change in settings, I don't know that, especially if you've never had a child go from elementary to middle or middle to high school, they don't really know how that setting is going to change. So I think it's really important to whether it's working with an advocate, a consultant, or seeking out people in that next setting, to really understand, what is that going to look like? How's that going to be different from where my child is now?
Yeah. And I know for my daughter's in 6th, and it was culture shock.
Mm-hmm.
Culture shock.
That's
And
probably one of the biggest changes is 5th to 6th grade, just because going from 1 or 2 teachers usually to 7 teachers, different expectations, deadlines, organization, putting your things in a locker, having the right materials, it's a major shift.
Yeah, that's something like all of the parents that I talk with, obviously I'm with lots of the other sixth grade parents and, even for the neurotypical kids, it's like, what? Like, elementary school, you didn't have to do homework. Now all of a sudden we're getting homework every single night and not just a little bit, like a lot of homework and it impacts your grade and 7 different teachers demanding 7 different ways of learning. And it's a lot. And
It's a big change. It's a big
yeah,
change.
yeah. And even being prepared, but I think one of the things, being prepared is what do you look, what do you look at? So I know for me, when my daughter was struggling in 4th grade, she's on the spectrum with PDA profile and she was struggling in 4th grade. So I started looking at like, I don't think middle school is going to work for her and started looking. So, I went and looked at a bunch of different private schools, couldn't find the fit. And she wanted to go to public school with her friends. So we'll make that work for as long as she can make it work, right? But do you have any, like, for kids, like we can even break it down to like levels of difficulties, like where you think like a child with minimal delays, what type of program would be better for them versus, a child with like more intensive needs, whether it be speech or intellectual or physical.
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, of course, every child, even within those kind of groupings, every child is different, and again, can't emphasize enough, a good assessment of where they are, including good information from their current teachers, good information from the parents about what's happening at home in terms of when they have to do work independently at the end of the school day. What does that look like? But we start with, does this child have a disability, and do they qualify for an IEP or 504 plan? And then are they making progress within that plan? And progress that's really become my mantra, I think, since Supreme Court case of 2017, Andrew F. Endrew, really emphasized that every child should be making progress related to their unique potential. So we're always looking at it. Did in this past year, did they progress or not? And if they didn't, let's start with what could be done differently in their current program at the current school. And then if parents are saying that it just still doesn't seem like a fit. Francis, I love what you did, because you said middle school is approaching. So in 4th grade, you started. So having that lead time is so important, because you want to go to all the open houses. You want to visit the different schools that might be possible. And, there are a set of private schools that work well with students with the mild challenges. I'm going to let Hayley talk more about that, but just finishing up with the public, there may be things that can be tweaked in that IEP or 504 plan to provide more services than the student is currently receiving. There may be new goals and objectives that really they need to work on because they're not making the progress they need to work on. There may be a public program that serves students with similar kinds of issues, and the public districts are not always transparent about what programs are out there. So you may have to ask around to friends, neighbors, or contact an educational consultant to talk about, is there a program within our school district that might be a good fit for my child? And then how do we access that program, which is usually through the IEP process, and it takes agreement with the IEP team that, yes, this child is not making the progress we had hoped for. So now let's look at something that's what we call a little more restrictive in terms of what parents would see, just a program that for at least part of the day can help my child to start to make that progress. Hayley, you want to talk about the private options that might serve kids with the mild needs?
Sure. So I'm going to preface this by going back to what I said before, really understanding what your child's needs are. I know for me, one of the first things that I do when I start working with a client, in addition to, going through their records, testing, report cards, and all so forth, is I really like to go observe them in their current environment to see how they're functioning within that. For kids who are a little bit older, I'll follow that up, especially if the child wants to talk or the parent thinks it's important for the child to talk with me. Usually, I mean, I've talked to kids as young as, third grade, second grade, third grade, just to get a sense of who they are and kind of hear from them, what they like, what they don't like about where they are, and where they think they would be successful. So that's just added information on top of what parents have shared with me. Once we have all that, I always tell parents, make sure that the environment, that the school that you're looking at, the private school, if it's a private school, is really not just giving accommodations, sort of, I don't want to use the word, let's say lip service, but they're actually doing it, and they're happy to do it. They're comfortable doing it. Some schools are better at that than others. Some schools will say we do these 4 accommodations. That's it, nothing more. So as a consultant, I've had a chance to get to know a lot of these schools in the area. Parents don't. So I try to, based on everything I know, I try to point them towards schools that I believe could be a good fit for their child. And then I also tell parents, look, if you go in to see that school or you have a conversation with admissions and they're hesitating, or you're getting a sense that this may not be the best fit for my child, don't put
Trust
that
it.
round peg in the, don't put the square peg in the round hole kind of thing, because it doesn't benefit anybody. And I also tell parents, and this is really important, be transparent with the school. Be very transparent. Be willing to share the latest evaluations, anything about your child that's going to help the school ensure that they really know who's coming to them, who this child is. Sometimes the visits can tell the school a lot, sometimes not as much. Kids are really good at masking things for, a short period of time, and then eventually it kind of goes by the wayside. So I think it's just really important that parents go into it with their eyes open and not feel bad if it turns out a school is not right for their child. It's okay. Right. There's lots of schools in this area, lots and lots of options. So that's what I would say. And don't be afraid to ask questions. I mean, go to the open houses. Admissions officers are happy to talk with parents. For a lot of my clients, I'll connect them with the school, but parents who are not working with a consultant can do the same thing in terms of reaching out, getting those questions answered. So that's kind of where I would start that process.
Yeah. I say it all the time. Go visit the school and trust your gut. Because there are times you walk onto a campus and it could be the best school ever, but it doesn't feel right. And so don't.
Yeah.
And, I get, well, where would you suggest for an autistic child that's higher functioning? I'm like, I need to know more than that. Because honestly, right. Like I have kids that I work with that are higher functioning autistic. I have them in Bridges. I have them in Connections. I've had them in SESES. I have them in non-publics, or I have them homeschooled because none of the above fit. And it really, what you guys keep saying is know your child and know what works for your child. And I also like to I love that you say, even at third grade, third grade, get your child's input of what they want. Mm-hmm. Because if if they want one setting and you're looking at a different setting, and as a parent, I know, because I'm dealing with it with my child, I know what setting I think would be best. But if she thinks a different setting, then I've got to go with, as they're older, with what she thinks, as long as it's not like absolutely the most horrific setting in the world. But it's, you have that little bit of, leeway there, and having your kids buy into it is really important.
Yeah. And self-aware, some kids are more self-aware than others. For some kids that starts early, and for others, they are in high school and aren't really self-aware yet. So I really, especially those kids that are self-aware, it's really good to hear from them what they think is going to be right for them.
And I just want to underline what you said about transparency. I think parents really struggle with this. There's an evaluation that says my child has autism, or there's an evaluation that says my child has some emotional challenges. And I just think that if they get to this next school, they're not going to have any of that. And I don't want him or her rejected because of that. And it almost always backfires. It's you really don't want your child accepted to a school that is not prepared to deal with a child that has had that profile in the past. It's not likely that next school will see none of those behaviors or none of those challenges.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that though, because I've had the experience, and I agree with you 100% that a lot of times behaviors don't change. But I've had the experience with some of my clients that we get them into an appropriate program and it's a different child. And that's the thing.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And that's the kind of fine line that I think Hayley and I and others who do this work walk, is that, yes, here's the past evaluation. Yes, in a class of 30 kids, she's having all these problems, and here's what we've done to intervene about that. And we do think in your class of 8 kids, she's not going to have these problems, because a lot of them have to do with her sensory sensitivities, or a lot of them have to do with when things are not really structured and clear. So I think we as consultants can help explain to the school why we do think they're an appropriate setting, even though there have been these problems in the past.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that goes back to, again, like the evaluations, making sure evaluations are good and that your child. First thing that popped into my head is a behavior intervention plan. Well, what's going on? Why are these behaviors? If the behaviors is, well, the sensory needs aren't being met. Well, the school can't meet the sensory needs. That's going to be very different in a school that can meet the sensory needs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So are things to consider. So what I'm trying to think of other questions of what might, parents that are so overwhelmed, obviously call a consultant, do your own research, go visit schools. Like, what are some other things like that are things that you wish parents knew before they started on this journey by themselves? And I'm sure you get them also. They've been on this journey for 2 years and still can't find the right school. Like, what should parents know at the beginning?
Go ahead, Hayley.
I mean, I think it kind of goes back to some of the other things that I said. There are lots of options in this area. And if you're either leaving public or have never even been in public, really getting a sense of who these schools are best to serve. And sometimes that's talking to other parents. We have some really great groups in this area that are very supportive to, we've got groups that support kids that are on the spectrum. We've got groups that support kids with ADHD and so forth. So if you can talk with other parents who've been through this before, to get a sense of what schools they considered and where their child ultimately ended up, I think it's really good. And I do always like to tell parents that I know what admissions tells me. I know what I see with my own eyes when I go for a visit, but it really comes down to, what is it really like? And that's why I always tell parents, if you know somebody or a couple of people who have some firsthand experience, that's really important to get also. But if you don't have those opportunities, I really think it's good to, start making a list of the schools that, that you think or you've heard about, and then start doing some research. Go on their website, read it, go through it, call the school, ask some questions, go to their open house, all those things, I think, and then you'll start to narrow your list down to really figure out which one or ones might be appropriate. And it's also competitive around here for our traditional schools, right? So know that this may sound like the most perfect school to you and you really want your child to get in, but they may not. So Do you have other options? Don't go through the process of looking at private schools and apply to one, unless you know that if that one school doesn't work out, I'm going to go to my public school, and I'm going to either, go through that IEP process if they haven't, or they're going to, try to improve what they've got there. If you're not prepared to do that, or homeschool, obviously, make sure you have a couple of schools that are on your list and that you're going to apply to, and then see what happens, because there are no guarantees. And the other thing is, and I always tell parents this too, the traditional schools, they have, there are certain years that are considered like entry years. So, kindergarten, 6th grade, 9th grade. And if you're applying for other years, also know that there's going to be far fewer spots. A lot of them may come from attrition, and sometimes schools will add some extra spaces as they add grades on and so forth. So be aware of that also. I mean, if there's 2 spots and they're going to have 50 applicants, and it's almost like it's like a little bit of a crapshoot. But also know that if your child is if they're going to be looking at applications from your child and another child, and thinking which child is going to be, and we think is going to be most successful at this school, if they're kind of on the fence about whether this child, is appropriate for their program, they're probably not going to be the one that gets chosen. But by having a couple options and looking at this through a clear-eyed lens, I think that parents can navigate this process.
Hayley, what would you say about one thing I hear run up against over the years with parents is, of course, all of us as parents want the best for our kids, and we think about the future, and we worry about the future. And I get parents who, they think, well, if he's going to get into college, and the best college, he's got to go to this private school to get into this college. And they may be in a little bit of a denial about some of the challenges that need to be addressed. How do you deal with that with your clients?
Right. And you're right. I do come up against that sometimes, because some parents are really adamant that their child has to go to this school and this school and this, because of what you were saying, to get in. They want to go to the right K-8 school to get into the right high school. They want to go to the right high school to get into the right college, right? But the thing is that putting your child in an environment that, if they've got anxiety, don't put them in a high pressure environment. It kind of comes down to that same thing. Like, think about what's best for your child. There are lots of colleges out there, hundreds, thousands of colleges out there. There are lots of high schools, etc. Like, think about which one is going to be the most successful environment for your child, so that you're not having to basically start the process over, after, last thing you want to do is get counseled out of a school. But more importantly, you spend a year there and you're like, it really is too much for my child, or this or that is really not working for them. You got to start over again. So really proactively think about, and again, know your child. There are top-notch schools in this area that are really wonderful for some kids. They call them like the big 3, and big this, big that. Doesn't matter. It's not important. What's most important is figuring out the best place for your child.
Right, because what's better, thinking of colleges and stuff, what's better to have been in a great school that you flunked out of and then went to a different school, right? Like, what are they looking at? That's not going to help. And I love that you
child's. Oh no, I'm sorry.
Exactly. No, it impacts the self-esteem. I was going to pull out the counseling out, because I'm not sure. I hadn't heard that term before. I talked to a friend of mine who's also a consultant about my daughter in a school, and counseling out is that the school determines that it's not a good fit. And so they counsel you out of the school. And one of the schools that was a lead contender that we really liked, my consultant friend said, yeah, they're known really well for counseling kids out. And I'm like, oh, okay. And that's where talking to a consultant, talking to other parents, seeing what's going on,
Yeah.
it just being aware of it. It doesn't mean they would definitely with your child, but it also means I needed to, like, I asked the question, like, oh, yeah, we'll do that. Oh, yeah, we'll do that. Do you really? And if
Right.
you don't, what happens?
Yeah, and the
Right.
counseling out issue is very, very real with private schools that are not, special education, quote unquote, special education schools. So if somehow you convince the school to take your child and maybe hold back information or minimize information, what good is that if 4 or 5 months down the road the school is saying no, they're not appropriate, and then you're really stuck.
Yeah.
So I think being
And it,
really
and it
careful.
happens. I mean, I
Yeah.
see it. I see it. Every year I've got a couple clients like that, that have come to me because they were, they did send their child to X, Y, or Z school, and they're like, okay, well, we need help. Help us now. And so I do see that. And it also gives me a better sense of what schools uh, are appropriate and which ones are not for different student profiles.
And I get the calls often, but legally, don't they have to
Right.
provide accommodations? Well, they do. They don't have to for the IEP, but they do have to follow ADA. And what is that line? Which is definitely not as, but they do. But my thing always is like, yes, could we fight this? But in reality, if the school doesn't want your child there, why do you want your child going there? You
Exactly.
know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
That's
talk
right.
to the school, see if you can, if it's the middle of the school year, say, okay, we realize it's not a good fit, but can we finish off the school year? How can we make it work to finish off the school
Right.
year? Go in on that collaborative way, because I mean, I like to believe that all schools want kids to be successful at their school and they want to make it work. If it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm sure they don't want to throw you out in the woods of like, oh no, too bad, you got to go to your home school.
Yeah. And you know, usually there is a way to work with the school to finish out that school year. Different, all different kinds of things that the collaboration between the parents and the school can usually make it work. But it's better to not end up in that situation. But if you do end up in that situation, know that there are ways to handle that so that you have time to figure out, well, where's the next place for my child.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot. I know it's a lot looking at schools.
It is a lot. It really is.
And that's
It
that's why, like, as I'm a strong advocate for you guys of getting that help, because even with my knowledge, I don't always know all of the schools, and I'll refer to you guys often of like, hey, go talk to the expert, because I don't do well. Could I do an observation and do my recommendations? Yes, based on my background with special ed masters and stuff, I could, but you're paying an attorney to do the
Mhm.
advocate, and it's not the best use of funds sometimes.
And also I think very current knowledge of the school options is
Yeah.
crucial. Schools
Yeah.
change
Oh, yeah.
all the time. New staff comes in, new administration comes in, new students come in, which drives a different atmosphere in the classroom. So having folks that have been to the schools recently or in communication with them regularly is really, really crucial.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah, and I would say, we're talking a lot about private schools, but going back to the public options, of course, if you have a child with an IEP, then the school has an obligation to educate your child in the least restrictive environment. And if it's not working in the neighborhood school, then there is an obligation to find an appropriate program within the school district, that could be at a different school, or to fund a program outside of the public school district. And there are a group of schools that we call non-publics that provide an appropriate education for students with uh, different kinds of disabilities, whether it be autism or emotional disabilities or another disability. So again, that's a whole range of schools, lots of options. It's again really crucial to know where is that school today in terms of the type of students they serve, the kind of climate that's in the school? Are they being successful with the students they say that they serve? Are they maybe full right now, which many schools have been
Mm,
the past few years, have been at capacity and it's been hard to get placements. So all those things are ever changing and,
Yeah,
it's really, really important to
definitely.
stay on top of them.
Yeah, and I say all the time, the administration can make or break a school or special ed
oh,
department,
sure.
100%. And then I like that you brought in the cohorts. Like I had a client one time that the kid for, I mean, 6 years, I think they were at the non-public school. In year seven, the cohort completely changed, and it was like,
Mm,
this doesn't work for us anymore,
Right.
and like it's still the great school that everybody raves about, but it's not a right fit anymore because of the other students that are there. And there's
Right.
no real control because although they generally do the same profile, as we all know, there's no real such thing as a same profile. you know, like,
Absolutely.
they're
and then,
similar, but yeah. Go
yeah, no,
ahead.
I was just going to say, in addition to these sort of mainstream private schools, and then we call the non-publics, there are also schools out there that specialize in serving kids with different disabilities, dyslexia, autism, ADHD, and executive function issues, and so forth. Um, but you have to sort of know that they're out there, because there's a lot of parents who don't know these programs, that yes, they're private pay, but that they do exist, and that maybe if the public's not working, and a mainstream private's not going to be right for your child, there may be another program uh, that is more suitable to them.
And just to piggyback on that, under some rare situations, the public schools do fund those programs, usually with the help of a lawyer like Francis, but to get some type of settlement. But it does happen, if that's the
Mhm.
school that can serve the child's particular needs and, really help them to make progress, that it is still possible to get funding.
Yeah. I want to clarify something because I heard you guys use the terminology, and it's the way I have always done it. Like I've always referred to special education schools as non-public, and then the other as private. They're both considered non-public
Hmm.
because
Right.
looking
That is
at schools of opening schools, they're both considered non-public. There's either the private pay or the special education one.
Hmm.
And there's two different statutes in Maryland law of what's required to opening the schools.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, in my research, I was like, whoa, wait, look at something from a different lens. It's very different. But because I get asked that all the time, what's the difference? It's like, so they're both non-public, they're both private, but there's special ed schools that are MSDE approved, or whatever your state is approved for the school district to pay for, and then there's your private schools that aren't on that list. And yes, as Rich said, there are ways to get the schools to sometimes pay for the private school under extreme circumstances. But yes, 99% of the time you need an attorney for that, because now you're going deeper into their pockets.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
um, and so, like, what I mean, I know we talked about it a lot, but like if you were to give your like top three things to parents listening of like, do these three steps first on your journey, could you narrow it down to three or two, or, what do you think?
I'll take a stab first. I mean, number one, I think we've said repeatedly, is know your child,
Yeah.
and to do so, having a good assessment that's recent and really addresses all the questions you have, but also know your child through the report cards, the teacher narratives, teacher conferences, and what you're seeing. Trust that as a parent as well. So I would say that's number one. My number two, I guess, would be understand all the options, and that would be public options, both that are at your neighborhood school, but other options that may not be as as transparent, that are in the school district at large. and then certainly know all the non-public. I learned that. All the non-public options, both ones that the school system might refer to, as well as the ones that school systems don't generally refer to. Number three, I think be willing to look at all of this objectively, and I'll say as a parent of two young men and now one perfect granddaughter. That and I say perfect granddaughter because we're not objective. I'm not objective about my own kids. I'm not
Nope.
objective about my grandchild. So to have someone who can really be objective and take a look at how your child is functioning and what their strengths and challenges are, because I think as parents we both overestimate our kids and underestimate our
Yep.
kids. So someone can really say, he really does have a strength in that area, and you should pay attention to that strength. And so those would be my three. I don't know, Hayley,
Awesome. Thank you.
else?
I actually think that what you said applies to looking at the private schools also. I mean, I really think those are all important things to think about as you're starting that process. Instead of looking at, what does my neighborhood school or what does the school system offer, you're going to be looking to see what private schools are out there, and the figuring out, does my child need something really specialized, or would they be fine, in my opinion, in a traditional school with some accommodations.
And that's where I always say, yes, I understand we have parents of special needs kids, funding is limited, but in a case like this, when it's your kid's education and the future, it really is worth spending the money to talk to a consultant that knows all this stuff. Because if not, you run the risk of A, spending all this time looking at all these schools that never were appropriate in the first place, or B, getting into a school that you think is appropriate and getting counseled out a few months later. And so talking to, and definitely, those that have their fingers on the pulse, know exactly what's happening now in those schools is so important. And I know we do have to wrap up because I do have a meeting right after this. But
Francis, can I just throw in one more thing about
Sure.
those top three, which is, I mentioned briefly, but I want to emphasize paying attention to the strengths, because a lot of what we've talked about, and for good reason, has been addressing the challenges and making sure you have a honest appraisal of those challenges and the school's a good match. But ultimately, if our kids are going to succeed in life, it's going to be because they understand their strengths and they capitalize on their strengths. So make sure that you pay attention to what the child's strong in, interested in, passionate about, and find a school or a program that's a good match with developing those areas of strength.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
And I know I'm going to say probably your website, which we will have the link, is the best way to get in touch with you and to start the process.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, please. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. And we will have that. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Stress Free IEP. We hope today's conversation gave you new tools, insights, or just a little more peace of mind as you support your neurodivergent child. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone in your village. Next week, we'll have episode 127, where Dr. Lisa Regal on NeuroWell will talk about why regulation comes before rigor in schools. You can always learn more and connect with me at schefterlaw.com or follow along on social media. And until next time, remember, you do not have to do it all alone.